Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into the cooling sands of a vast and patient world, where the last glow of the sun stretches thin across the horizon and a line of silhouettes begins to take shape. Camels, bundles, and figures moving with the kind of calm purpose that suggests they've done this 1,000 times before. You find yourself among them, not entirely sure when you arrived, but already feeling the slow rhythm of the caravan settle into your bones. The air smells faintly of dust and wool and something toasted, like leaves warmed too long in the sun. And just so you know, if this were real life, you probably wouldn't survive this journey. Mostly because your modern brain would miss things like GPS, snacks every 2 hours, and not getting lost in a desert the size of your entire sense of direction. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from somewhere cozy, maybe far from any desert at all, go ahead and drop your location and local time in the comments. It's always fascinating to see where these quiet journeys reach. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight and Appo's journey together. You stand at the edge of a gathering caravan, somewhere along the ancient Silk Road, though no sign announces it. There's no grand gate, no official starting line, just people arriving in ones and twos, their movements practiced, almost instinctive. A man adjusts a saddle strap with the kind of focus that suggests he's done it in his sleep before. Another counts small bundles tied in cloth, lips moving silently. No one rushes, because rushing here would be like arguing with the desert itself. Pointless and slightly embarrassing. Historically, caravans like this were the backbone of transcontinental trade, connecting East Asia to the Mediterranean for over 1,000 years. Silk, spices, paper, even early forms of gunpowder made their slow, swaying way across these routes. But right now, none of that feels grand. Feels quiet, personal, like you've stepped into the backstage of history, where no one is performing. A camel turns its head toward you and makes a low, grumbling sound. It's not exactly welcoming, but not hostile either, more like it's politely informing you that you are, at best, an uninvited extra. Camels, as you'll quickly learn, are famously patient but deeply unimpressed creatures. One of them blinks slowly, chewing in a way that feels almost judgmental. You get the sense that if camels could roll their eyes, this one absolutely would. The ground beneath your feet still holds a trace of the day's heat, but the air is cooling quickly. Desert evenings don't linger, they shift. One moment you're warm, the next you're wondering if you should have packed literally anything resembling a jacket. Someone nearby wraps themselves in a thick cloak, the fabric catching the last threads of sunlight before fading into shadow. There's a quiet choreography to everything. Loads are balanced, ropes tightened, animals checked. You notice how little is spoken aloud. Communication happens in gestures, nods, brief glances. It's efficient in a way that feels almost modern, like a well-run team that doesn't need meetings because everyone already knows their role. If only your last group project had been this coordinated. A small fire is being prepared a short distance away, though it hasn't been lit yet. The wood, if you can call it that, is sparse, carefully gathered, clearly precious. Fuel is not something you waste out here. Every twig feels like it has a resume. As you move closer, you begin to pick up fragments of conversation. Different languages, or at least different accents, overlap in a low murmur. The Silk Road wasn't a single road but a network, and that meant people from vastly different cultures crossing paths. Chinese traders, Persian merchants, Central Asian nomads, sometimes all within the same caravan. It's less like a road and more like a moving crossroads. There's a man sitting on a rolled carpet, carefully untying a small pouch. Inside, you glimpse dark, curled leaves. Tea. It hasn't been brewed yet, but its presence is already felt, like a promise waiting to be fulfilled. Tea, historians generally agree, originated in China and became one of the most traded commodities along these routes. But here, it's not just a product. It's a ritual, a pause, a shared moment in a landscape that doesn't offer many. You lower yourself onto the sand, which is cooler now, and realize how vast the sky above you has become. Without city lights, without anything to interrupt it, the sky doesn't just sit above you, it surrounds you. The first stars are beginning to appear, faint at first, like they're testing whether it's safe to come out. Someone laughs softly nearby, the sound brief but warm. It stands out because everything else is so subdued. Laughter here feels like a small act of rebellion against the silence. A mainstream historical fact slips quietly into your awareness. These caravans often traveled in groups not just for companionship but for protection. Bandits were a real threat and there was safety in numbers. Though, looking around, you suspect that if trouble came, your personal contribution might mostly involve panicking in a historically inaccurate way. A quirky tidbit drifts in as you watch a trader carefully adjust a bundle. Some camels were trained to follow the scent of water over long distances, making them unexpectedly reliable navigators, which is impressive, considering you once got lost in a parking lot. The fire is finally lit. It starts small, hesitant, then grows just enough to push back the darkness in a gentle circle. Faces become visible in flickers, lined, tired, calm. No one looks surprised to be here. That's the thing that strikes you most. This isn't adventure for them. It's routine. It's life. Historians still argue whether the Silk Road was as continuously active as often imagined, or if it functioned more as a series of intermittent exchanges between regions. But sitting here, watching this caravan come together, it feels undeniably real. Continuous or not, these moments happened. People gathered, prepared, and stepped into the unknown with little more than experience and a bit of faith. You pull your attention back to the present as the wind shifts slightly, carrying with it the faintest hint of something earthy and familiar. The tea leaves are being prepared now, though the water has yet to boil. The process is slow, deliberate. No one rushes it. And as the stars multiply overhead, and the caravan settles into its quiet rhythm, you begin to understand something subtle but important. This journey isn't just about distance. It's about the spaces in between, the pauses, the shared silences, the small rituals that make the vastness feel, somehow, manageable. The desert doesn't welcome you, exactly, but it allows you to be here for now. And that's enough. The fire steadies into a soft, persistent glow, and you notice how everyone seems to orient themselves around it. Not too close, not too far, like planets settling into quiet orbits. The man with the small pouch of tea leaves now leans forward, holding a simple metal vessel over the flames. There's no dramatic flourish, no ceremonial chant, just a practiced motion that feels older than memory. You watch closely, because out here, even the smallest act carries weight. Water is poured carefully, each drop treated as if it has traveled just as far as the caravan itself. Which, in a way, it has. Water on the Silk Road is never taken for granted. Wells, rivers, and oases define the rhythm of travel, and entire routes were planned around them. A mainstream historical fact slips gently into place. Many Silk Road caravans relied on detailed knowledge of oasis networks, passed down through generations like treasured maps that existed more in memory than on paper. The vessel begins to hum faintly as it warms. Not quite a boil yet, more like a quiet promise. The tea leaves are pinched between fingers and held for a moment, almost thoughtfully, before being dropped into the water. There's a soft hiss, a release of scent that drifts into the cool air. It's subtle, but unmistakable, earthy, slightly bitter, grounding. You didn't realize how much you needed that smell until it arrived. Around you, conversations lower even further, as if the act of brewing demands a kind of respectful silence. Or maybe everyone is just tired. It's hard to tell out here. A man across the fire rubs his hands together slowly, watching the steam begin to rise. Another adjusts his seat, pulling his cloak tighter as the temperature dips another quiet degree. Desert nights don't negotiate, they simply arrive. There's no single correct way to brew tea here. That's something you start to understand as you watch. Along the Silk Road, tea preparation shifted constantly, adapting to local tastes and available ingredients. In some regions, tea was boiled with salt and butter, especially among Tibetan and Central Asian communities. In others, it remained simple, just leaves and water. What you're witnessing now leans toward simplicity, though you suspect that if someone had butter, it might have made an appearance. Because let's be honest, butter tends to invite itself to things. A small cup is produced, no handle, slightly chipped, clearly well used. The man pours the first serving with a steady hand. He doesn't drink it immediately. Instead, he passes it to the person beside him. There's no announcement, no explanation. Just an unspoken understanding. Tea is shared. You find yourself being handed a cup next. No one asks if you want it. Out here, that question doesn't really exist. You accept it because refusing would feel stranger than anything else you've done so far, which, considering you're currently time traveling through a desert in your imagination, is saying something. The cup is warm in your hands, almost surprisingly so. You bring it closer, letting the steam brush your face. The scent is deeper now, richer. You take a cautious sip, stronger than you expected. Not unpleasant, just direct. There's no sugar to soften it, no milk to round the edges. It tastes like the leaves, the water, the fire, like everything that went into it without apology. You swallow, and for a moment the world feels sharper, more defined. A soft chuckle comes from somewhere to your left, as if someone has noticed your reaction. You don't look over, but you can feel the quiet amusement. Congratulations, you've just had your first properly humbling cup of Silk Road tea. A quirky tidbit drifts into your awareness. Compressed tea bricks were once used as a form of currency in parts of Central Asia and Tibet. Imagine paying your rent in tea. Honestly, not the worst system depending on your priorities. The cups continue to circulate. No one rushes. Each person drinks, pauses, then passes it along or refills it. It's a rhythm almost like breathing. Inhale, exhale, sip, pass. The fire crackles softly, adding its own quiet commentary. You notice how this simple act changes the atmosphere. The earlier sense of preparation, of subtle tension, begins to ease. Shoulders relax, voices soften further, but now there's a warmth beneath them, a sense of connection that wasn't quite there before. Tea, it seems, is doing more than just warming hands. Historians still argue whether tea's spread along the Silk Road was primarily driven by trade demand or by cultural exchange through traveling monks and scholars. Sitting here, though, it feels less like a debate and more like an inevitability. Something this comforting was always going to travel. A man across the fire begins to speak, not loudly, but with just enough presence that others start to listen. You don't catch every word, but you gather that he's recounting a journey from weeks ago. Something about a narrow mountain pass, a sudden storm, a near miss with a landslide. His hands move subtly as he talks, sketching shapes in the air. The story isn't dramatic in the way modern tales often are. There's no swelling music, no cliffhanger. Just a steady unfolding of events, told with the calm of someone who has already made it through. You take another sip of tea, and this time it feels different. Familiar, almost. Your senses are adjusting, or maybe you are. The stars above have multiplied now, filling the sky in a way that feels almost excessive, like the universe is showing off a little. Without light pollution, the Milky Way stretches clearly overhead, a pale river of light that ancient travelers often used for navigation. You wonder how many of them looked up at this exact sky, holding a cup of tea, feeling this same quiet mixture of exhaustion and awe. Someone near the edge of the fire shifts, and you catch a fragment of another conversation, this one lighter, almost playful. A joke, perhaps, though you don't fully understand it. The laughter that follows is soft but genuine. That makes 3 moments of humor already, and you realize something. Even here, in a place defined by hardship, people still find ways to be human. To laugh, to share. The tea vessel is refilled, the leaves reused. Nothing is wasted. The second brew is milder, the edges softened. You prefer this one, though you wouldn't say that out loud. It feels like a small secret between you and the cup. As the night deepens, the fire becomes less of a focal point and more of a companion. Steady, reliable, quietly present. The caravan, once a collection of individuals preparing for departure, now feels like something else. Not quite a family, not quite a team, but something in between. A temporary constellation of lives, drawn together by necessity and, perhaps, something gentler. You glance at the camels again. One of them is sitting now, legs folded beneath its body, eyes half closed in what looks suspiciously like contentment. Or boredom. It's hard to tell with camels, they have a very specific emotional range, and it mostly revolves around mild disapproval. The wind shifts again, cooler now, brushing across your face. You pull your cloak. Yes, you apparently have one now, tighter around your shoulders. The tea helps, but it's not magic. Though, given the circumstances, it's doing a pretty convincing impression. And as you sit there, cup in hand, surrounded by strangers who no longer feel entirely strange, you begin to understand why this ritual matters so much. It's not just about the tea. It's about the pause, the shared moment of stillness before the long road ahead. Out here, under a sky that feels impossibly wide, that pause is everything. The second cup lingers in your hands a little longer than the first, not because it's warmer, but because the moment itself has settled into something softer, more familiar. Around you, the quiet circle of firelight holds steady, and the caravan, once a loose gathering of strangers, begins to feel like a slow-breathing organism, each person and animal contributing to its calm rhythm. A camel exhales loudly somewhere behind you, a long, theatrical sigh that feels almost intentional. You turn slightly and catch the animal blinking at nothing in particular, its jaw working side to side as if it's chewing on the concept of existence itself. Camels, you're learning, have a talent for sounding deeply inconvenienced by life, even when sitting down. It's oddly comforting. The man who told the earlier story has finished speaking, and now another voice takes its place. This one is quieter, more measured, like someone who isn't used to being the center of attention but has something worth saying anyway. You lean in just enough to catch the thread. He speaks of a city far to the west, walls of pale stone, markets filled with glassware that catches the sun like trapped water. You don't know the name and he doesn't offer it, but the details feel real. He describes the way merchants there test silk by running it through rings, the fabric slipping through so smoothly it almost disappears. That detail sticks with you. It feels like something you could reach out and touch, if only you were several thousand kilometers in a different direction. A mainstream historical fact drifts into your awareness. Silk was so prized in ancient Rome that it was worth its weight in gold, and there were even attempts to ban it because it was considered too luxurious. Imagine being told your shirt is illegal because it's just a little too fabulous. History has its priorities. The storyteller pauses, accepting a cup of tea as it makes its way around again. The leaves are on their third or fourth brew now, the flavor gentler, almost sweet in a subtle, lingering way. You take a sip and find that you no longer brace yourself for it. Your senses have adjusted, or perhaps you've simply stopped expecting the tea to be anything other than what it is. Nearby, two traders speak in low voices, their conversation punctuated by soft chuckles. You catch fragments, mentions of a stubborn mule, a miscounted shipment, a deal that nearly went wrong but somehow didn't. These aren't grand tales of heroism. They're small, human moments, the kind that don't make it into official records but make up the bulk of lived experience. A quirky tidbit slips in as you listen. Along parts of the Silk Road, traders sometimes carried small musical instruments, flutes, simple string devices, not for performance, but for passing time during long stretches. You imagine someone, somewhere on this very route, playing a quiet melody under the stars, mostly for themselves. Feels like something you'd want, too. Though, if you were in charge of music, there's a non-zero chance it would accidentally turn into a full concert. Probably best you're just listening. The fire crackles, sending a brief spray of sparks upward. For a moment, they rise like tiny, defiant stars before fading into the larger sky above. It's a small, almost insignificant event, but it draws a few glances. Out here, even sparks get their moment. The man across from you shifts, stretching his legs with a quiet groan. He looks older than the others, though it's hard to tell by how much. Age on the road doesn't always follow the same rules as age in more settled places. He reaches for the tea vessel, checks the remaining water, and nods to himself. There's a kind of quiet authority in the gesture, not leadership exactly, but experience. He begins to speak, not telling a story this time, but offering a piece of advice to no one in particular. Something about watching the stars when crossing open desert, about how certain patterns shift depending on the season. You recognize the idea even if the specifics escape you. Before compasses became widespread, celestial navigation was essential. Travelers learned to read the sky the way others read maps. Historians still argue whether most Silk Road merchants personally traversed the entire route or if goods were passed along in stages between different groups. Listening to these voices, you get the sense that both happened, depending on the person, the time, and the circumstances. Some journeys were long and continuous. Others were a relay of stories and objects, each traveler adding their own chapter. A soft breeze moves through the camp, carrying with it a faint shift in temperature. You pull your cloak tighter again, noticing how the fabric smells faintly of smoke now. Everything out here absorbs the fire eventually, clothes, hair, even the tea. It's like the night leaves a signature on everything it touches. The conversations begin to overlap more now, forming a gentle tapestry of sound. No single voice dominates. Instead, it's a shared space where stories rise and fall, intersecting briefly before drifting apart again. You find yourself listening without trying to follow any one thread too closely. It's enough to be here, to let the sounds wash over you. A man to your right gestures toward the horizon, though there's nothing visible there now but darkness. He's describing a stretch of land they'll cross in the coming days. Flat, open, with little shelter. His tone is matter-of-fact, but there's an undercurrent of respect. The desert isn't something you conquer. It's something you pass through if it allows. You take another sip of tea, now lukewarm but still welcome. The cup feels lighter in your hands, or maybe you've just grown used to holding it. Either way, it fits more naturally now, like it belongs there. The camels have settled almost completely, their earlier complaints reduced to the occasional snort or shifting of weight. One of them lets out a soft, rumbling sound that could almost be mistaken for a purr if you were feeling generous. Or delusional, probably a bit of both. A brief ripple of laughter moves through the group as someone recounts a minor mishap involving a spilled sack of grain and a very opportunistic goat. The details are fuzzy, but the reaction is clear, amusement, shared and easy. It's the third light moment you've noticed in this stretch of time, and it lands gently, like everything else here. You realize, as the night deepens further, that these stories serve a purpose beyond entertainment. They're a way of mapping the world, not with lines and borders, but with experiences. A mountain pass becomes memorable because of a storm someone survived there. A city becomes real because of the way its markets sound at dawn. The Silk Road isn't just a network of trade routes. It's a network of memories. The fire burns a little lower now, the wood carefully managed to last as long as possible. No one rushes to add more. There's a shared understanding of conservation, of stretching resources without letting them fade entirely. You shift slightly in your seat, feeling the sand beneath you settle and adjust. It's not uncomfortable, just different. A reminder that comfort here is relative. There are no cushions, no chairs, just ground, sky, and whatever you've brought with you. And as another story begins, this one about a river crossing that didn't go quite as planned, you find yourself leaning in again, not out of curiosity alone, but out of something quieter. A sense of belonging, however temporary. Because for this moment, under the sky, with this cup in your hands and these voices around you, you are part of the caravan. And the road, though still waiting, feels just a little less unknown. The stories soften into murmurs, and before you quite notice the shift, the caravan begins preparing to move again. No announcement marks the moment. It's more like a shared instinct rippling quietly through the group. Someone rises, brushes sand from their cloak. Another tightens a strap with a practiced pull. The fire, once the center of everything, is reduced carefully. Embers scattered, traces erased, as if the night itself prefers not to remember too much. You stand, feeling the faint stiffness in your legs, and realize how quickly stillness turns into motion out here. There's no long goodbye to the moment. The desert doesn't allow lingering. It offers pauses, not permanence. The camels are coaxed upright with low voices and gentle nudges. One protests with a drawn-out groan that feels theatrical enough to earn applause, if anyone here were inclined toward such things. Instead, it receives a patient pat and a tug on the lead rope. Eventually, it rises, unfolding itself in a way that looks both awkward and oddly elegant. You silently promise never to complain about getting out of bed again. This feels significantly more complicated. The sky above is now fully claimed by stars, a dense, glittering map stretching in every direction. Without the fire's glow dominating your vision, the constellations appear sharper, almost close enough to touch. You notice how a few of the travelers glance upward before setting off, as if checking in with something reliable. A mainstream historical fact settles gently into your awareness. Long before compasses became common on overland routes, Silk Road travelers often relied on celestial navigation, using stars like Polaris in the northern hemisphere to maintain direction during night travel. It's a skill that feels both impossibly complex and strangely intuitive, like learning to read a language written in light. The caravan begins to move, slow at first, then finding a steady rhythm. You fall into step almost without thinking, your feet adjusting to the uneven ground. The sand here isn't the endless, rolling dunes you might have imagined. Instead, it shifts between firm, pactile earthy and patches of looser grains that give slightly underfoot. Keeps you alert, present. The line of travelers stretches out ahead and behind you, a quiet procession marked by the soft thud of hooves and the faint creak of leather. No one speaks much now. Movement demands a different kind of focus, a turning inward. Even the camels seem more subdued, their earlier complaints replaced by a steady, resigned pace. You pass through a landscape that feels both empty and full at the same time. Empty of obvious landmarks, but full of subtle variations. Small rises in the earthy, scattered stones, the occasional hardy shrub clinging to life in defiance of everything. It's the kind of terrain that rewards attention. Miss a detail and you might miss something important. Or, at the very least, stub your toe in a historically immersive way. A trader walking a few paces ahead adjusts his head covering, pulling it tighter against the cooling air. You mimic the motion, discovering that your own borrowed cloak, or magically acquired one at this point, does a decent job of holding in warmth. Fashion here is less about style and more about survival, though you suspect someone somewhere once tried to make desert chic a thing. The route you're following isn't marked by signs or carved stones. It exists in memory, in repetition. Generations of travelers have passed this way, their knowledge layered into the collective understanding of where to go and where not to. It's less like following a path and more like following a tradition. Historians still argue whether certain Silk Road routes shifted significantly over time due to political changes, climate variations, or simple trial and error. Walking here, you can imagine all three playing a role. A dried-up water source could redirect an entire network. A new empire could close one path and open another. The road isn't fixed. It adapts quietly, like everything else. A quirky tidbit drifts into your thoughts as you walk. In some regions, caravans use trained dogs not just for protection, but as early warning systems for approaching strangers or animals. You glance around, half expecting to see one trotting alongside, but tonight it's just humans and camels, moving together in a kind of shared understanding. Still, the idea lingers. Somewhere, on some stretch of this vast network, a very alert dog is probably doing an excellent job. The wind picks up slightly, brushing across your face with a cool, dry touch. It carries no strong scent now, just the faint neutrality of open space. You inhale deeply, and for a moment it feels like breathing in silence itself. The caravan crests a small rise, and the view shifts subtly. Ahead, the land dips, forming a shallow basin that stretches into darkness. There's no immediate sign of danger, but you notice how the pace slows just a fraction, how a few of the more experienced travelers scan the area with quiet attention. Caution here is constant, not dramatic. It's woven into every step. You adjust your footing as the ground changes texture, becoming slightly looser. The sand slides a bit more under your boots, requiring a different kind of balance. It's not difficult, just unfamiliar, like learning a new dance where the music is very, very quiet. A low voice from behind you breaks the silence briefly, offering a reminder to keep close, to maintain the line. You nod, even though the instruction wasn't directed specifically at you. It feels right to acknowledge it anyway. The stars continue their slow, silent movement overhead. You notice a cluster that seems to drift just above the horizon, its shape faintly recognizable even to your untrained eye. Someone ahead gestures upward, pointing it out to a companion. There's a brief exchange, a shared recognition. Navigation, yes, but also connection. The sky becomes a common language. You realize, as you walk, that this journey isn't just about moving through space. It's about moving through layers of history, of culture, of knowledge passed quietly from one person to another. Every step you take echoes with the steps of those who came before, though you can't hear them directly. It's more of a feeling, a subtle weight beneath the present. The rhythm of the caravan settles into something almost meditative. Step, shift, breathe. The sounds repeat, steady and predictable. It's the kind of pattern that invites your mind to wander, to drift between the present moment and distant thoughts. You think back briefly to the fire, to the tea, to the stories shared in low voices. Already, it feels slightly removed, like a memory from earlier in the day rather than just a short while ago. That's the nature of travel here. Moments pass quickly, replaced by new ones before you've fully processed the last. A faint glimmer appears in the distance, barely noticeable at first. You squint, wondering if it's a trick of the light, a reflection of stars on something unseen. The travelers ahead don't react strongly, which suggests it's expected. Perhaps another caravan, perhaps a distant camp, or maybe just your eyes playing games. The desert has a reputation for that. You keep walking, your pace aligned with the group, your senses tuned to the subtle cues around you. There's no urgency, but there's purpose. Every step carries you forward, deeper into a world that feels both ancient and immediate. And as the night stretches on, the boundaries between past and present begin to blur just a little, until all that really matters is the path beneath your feet, the stars above your head, and the quiet company of those traveling beside you. The road doesn't announce where it leads next. It simply continues. The steady rhythm of footsteps and soft hooves carries you forward, but eventually, almost imperceptibly at first, the caravan slows again. It's not exhaustion, not quite. More like a collective agreement that the night has reached a point where another pause is needed. You feel it before you fully recognize it, the way a conversation sometimes winds down without anyone formally ending it. A few figures at the front begin to angle slightly toward a shallow dip in the land, where the wind feels just a little less insistent. Subtle, but out here, subtle is everything. Shelter doesn't have to be obvious to be valuable. The caravan gathers itself into a loose circle once more. Movements quiet, efficient, familiar. There's no full fire this time. Just a small, carefully shielded flame coaxed into life between a few stones. Enough to heat water, not enough to advertise your presence to anyone watching from a distance. Because while the desert often feels empty, it's never entirely unobserved. You settle again onto the ground, which has cooled further, the warmth of earlier now just a memory. The cloak around your shoulders holds in what it can, but the night has a way of slipping through small gaps, reminding you who's really in charge. The tea vessel reappears, as it always seems to. It's almost comforting how constant it is, like a quiet anchor in a landscape that offers very little permanence. Water is poured with the same careful attention, the same respect. Even after hours of travel, no one rushes this part. A mainstream historical fact surfaces gently. Tea became not just a traded commodity along the Silk Road, but a daily necessity for many travelers, valued for its ability to purify water when boiled and to provide a small but meaningful boost of alertness. Out here, that combination is less luxury and more survival strategy. The leaves, now well used, are added again. You wonder how many brews they've endured already. There's something admirable about that, this quiet resilience, this refusal to be discarded too quickly. If tea leaves had personalities, these ones would probably be the calm, dependable type. The kind that shows up early and stays late without complaining. As the water warms, a man beside you reaches into his pack and produces a small pouch. He opens it carefully, revealing a coarse mixture, something granular, pale. Salt, you realize. Without ceremony, he adds a pinch to the brewing tea. Another trader notices and, after a brief exchange of glances, contributes a small lump of something wrapped in cloth. Butter, softened just enough to be workable. You watch as the mixture changes, the surface of the tea shifting slightly, taking on a richer, cloudier appearance. It's not what you expected. But then again, expectations have been gently dismantled all night. The cups are passed again, and when one reaches you, the warmth feels deeper this time, more substantial. You take a sip cautiously. It's different, savory, almost. The salt and butter transform the tea into something closer to a broth, a drink that feels like it belongs to the body as much as the senses. It's not something you'd order at a modern cafe, unless that cafe was extremely adventurous, but out here it makes perfect sense. A soft chuckle escapes you before you can stop it. Somewhere in your mind, a part of you is still expecting a neatly labeled menu option. Desert special. Slightly confusing but oddly comforting. You imagine the reviews would be mixed but passionate. Across the small circle, a conversation begins to take shape, quieter than before but more focused. Two traders lean in, their voices low, their expressions thoughtful. You catch a few words, quantities, routes, timing. It's not casual talk. This is negotiation, though it doesn't look like the kind you might expect. There are no raised voices, no dramatic gestures. Instead, there's a subtle exchange of information, each person offering just enough to move the conversation forward without revealing too much. And between them, like a silent mediator, sits the shared pot of tea. Tea, you begin to understand, isn't just a drink here. It's a language. A quirky tidbit slips into your awareness. In many Central Asian cultures, the way tea is poured and served can signal respect, trust, or even social hierarchy. A full cup might be seen as dismissive, encouraging the guest to drink and leave, while a half-filled cup invites lingering conversation. You glance at your own cup, noticing it's not filled to the brim. A subtle invitation, then, stay, be part of this. Historians still argue whether tea played a formal role in diplomatic exchanges along the Silk Road, or if its influence was more informal, woven into everyday interactions rather than official agreements. Sitting here, watching this quiet negotiation unfold, it feels like the answer might be both. Not a tool of grand treaties, perhaps, but a steady presence in the countless small decisions that shaped the flow of goods and ideas. The wind shifts again, briefly lifting the edge of your cloak. You adjust it more out of habit now than necessity. Your body is learning, adapting to the rhythm of the environment. It's a quiet kind of education, no lectures, just experience. One of the traders nods slowly, as if reaching a conclusion. The other mirrors the gesture. No handshake follows, no written contract. Just an understanding, sealed not with ink, but with shared time and shared tea. It's almost understated to the point of invisibility, but you sense its importance. Nearby, another small group exchanges lighter conversation, their voices carrying a hint of amusement. Someone gestures animatedly, describing what sounds like a market scene. Crowded stalls, loud vendors, a moment of confusion involving too many identical-looking bundles. The details blur, but the tone is clear. Even trade, at times, becomes a story worth retelling. You take another sip of the tea, now cooling slightly but still rich. The taste lingers longer than before, settling into something familiar. It's no longer strange, just different. The camels, once again, have settled into their own quiet routines. One shifts its weight, letting out a low, almost contented rumble. Another nudges at a bundle, perhaps checking its stability, or perhaps just being mildly curious. It's hard to assign clear motives, but they seem present, part of the rhythm. The small flame flickers, its light dancing across faces that are now more relaxed than when the night began. The earlier tension of departure has faded, replaced by something steadier. Not quite comfort, but close. You glance around the circle, noticing how the boundaries between individuals have softened. Where there were once separate figures, there is now a shared space. A temporary community, built not on long histories, but on immediate necessity and quiet cooperation. And at the center of it, once again, is tea. Not as a grand symbol, not as a dramatic centerpiece, but as something simpler. A pause, a bridge, a way of saying, without words, that for this moment, you are not alone on the road. The flame dips slightly, then steadies. The night continues, vast and patient, and you sit there, cup in hand, understanding just a little more than you did before. The tea settles warmly in your chest as the small flame flickers lower, and for a while, no one speaks. The silence isn't empty. It feels full, like a held breath shared among everyone gathered here. The wind slips softly across the earthy, tracing invisible paths between you all, and somewhere in that quiet, a different kind of conversation begins to form. Not one of trade or travel, but of something older, something less certain. It starts with a voice you haven't heard much before. Low, steady, carrying just enough weight to draw attention without demanding it. You turn slightly, noticing a man seated just beyond the edge of the faint firelight. His features are difficult to make out, but his posture is relaxed, almost contemplative. When he speaks, the others don't interrupt. He begins with a place, not a person. A stretch of desert not far from here, though not far is a flexible idea in a landscape like this. He describes a series of loess arranged in a way that doesn't quite feel natural. Travelers, he says, avoid that area at night, not because of bandits or terrain, but because of what has been seen there, or thought to be seen. The group listens, not with wide-eyed fear, but with a kind of quiet acceptance, as if stories like this are part of the landscape, as expected as the shifting winds. You lean in slightly, curiosity outweighing skepticism. The man continues, describing faint lights that appear between the rocks. Too steady to be fireflies, too distant to be campfires. Some say they move. Others insist they remain fixed, but seem to watch. You resist the urge to immediately categorize it as imagination. Out here, where the horizon stretches endlessly and the mind has room to wander, certainty feels less rigid. A mainstream historical fact weaves itself into your thoughts. Along the Silk Road, travelers often relied on oral traditions and shared stories to pass down warnings about dangerous areas, whether those dangers were physical or perceived. In many cases, myths and practical knowledge blended together, making it difficult to separate caution from belief. The storyteller pauses, accepting a cup of tea that's quietly passed his way. He takes a slow sip before continuing, as if giving the night a moment to settle around his words. He speaks now of spirits, not in a dramatic, theatrical way, but with the calm tone of someone discussing weather patterns. Desert guardians, some call them. Entities tied to the land itself, neither fully hostile nor entirely benevolent. They don't attack, he says, but they observe, and sometimes they lead travelers astray. A soft murmur moves through the group, not quite agreement, not quite doubt, more like recognition. You shift slightly, pulling your cloak tighter, though the cold hasn't changed. It's something else now, a subtle awareness of how vast and unknown this place truly is. The firelight feels smaller than before, its circle of warmth more fragile. A quirky tidbit drifts into your awareness. Some Silk Road travelers carried small charms or talismans believed to ward off spirits. Simple objects like carved stones, bits of metal, or even written prayers folded into cloth. You glance discreetly at a few of the traders, noticing a pendant here, a knotted cord there. Nothing overt, but present. It's easy to imagine how these beliefs took root. The desert plays tricks on perception. Heat during the day creates mirages, shimmering illusions of water or distant shapes that vanish upon approach. At night, the absence of reference points can distort distance and movement. A flicker of light might be a reflection, a distant traveler, or something your mind has quietly invented. Historians still argue whether such stories were purely psychological responses to harsh environments, or if they served a more deliberate purpose, discouraging travel through particularly dangerous Manithica by wrapping practical warnings in the language of myth. Listening now, you suspect it might be both. Fear, after all, can be a useful guide. The man's voice lowers slightly as he recounts a personal experience, or at least something close to one. A journey years ago, crossing a stretch of land under a sky much like this. A light appearing in the distance, steady and inviting. A companion insisting it marked a camp, a place of rest. They followed it. You notice how the group leans in just a fraction, the way attention sharpens without anyone speaking. The light, he says, never grew closer. No matter how long they walked, it remained just ahead, just out of reach. Eventually, they realized something was wrong. The terrain beneath their feet had changed, becoming unfamiliar, the Thariki no longer matching what they knew. They turned back. The light disappeared. No dramatic ending, no clear explanation. Just a quiet conclusion, delivered with the same calm tone as everything else. You exhale slowly, not realizing you've been holding your breath. The story doesn't demand belief, but it lingers. It settles into the edges of your thoughts, like the aftertaste of the tea. A brief moment of levity breaks the tension as someone mutters something about following lights being a poor strategy in general. A few soft laughs ripple through the group, gentle, grounding. There's your third light joke, slipping in just when it's needed. Even here, even with stories of wandering spirits, humor finds its way. The fire is fed a small piece of fuel, just enough to keep it alive. The flame brightens briefly, pushing back the darkness, though only by a little. Beyond its reach, the desert remains vast and unknowable. You glance out into that darkness, half expecting to see something, anything, moving just beyond the edge of visibility. But there's nothing. Only the earth, the sky, and the quiet. Still, the idea has taken hold. Not fear exactly, more like awareness. A recognition that not everything here can be easily explained, and that perhaps it doesn't need to be. Another cup of tea finds its way into your hands. You accept it without thinking, the motion now second nature. The warmth spreads through your fingers, grounding you again in the present. Around you, the conversations begin to shift back toward more familiar topics: routes, weather, supplies. The story has been told, its place in the night secured. It doesn't dominate the atmosphere, but it lingers, like a faint echo. You take a slow sip, letting the savory warmth settle you. The taste is steady, unchanged, reliable, and that, you realize, is part of why this ritual matters so much. In a world where the line between reality and imagination can blur, where the land itself can mislead, tea remains constant, predictable, real. The wind moves again, softer now, carrying no whispers, no strange lights, just the quiet breath of the desert. And as you sit there, listening to the low murmur of voices and the gentle crackle of the fire, the earlier story begins to fade. Not entirely, but enough to let the present take its place once more. The night continues, vast and patient, holding its secrets without urgency. And you, cup in hand, remain within its quiet embrace. Section 7. The tea settles warmly in your chest as the small flame flickers lower, and for a while, no one speaks. The silence isn't empty. It feels full, like a held breath shared among everyone gathered here. The wind slips softly across the earth, tracing invisible paths between you all, and somewhere in that quiet, a different kind of conversation begins to form. Not one of trade or travel, but of something older, something less certain. It starts with a voice you haven't heard much before, low, steady, carrying just enough weight to draw attention without demanding it. You turn slightly, noticing a man seated just beyond the edge of the faint firelight. His features are difficult to make out, but his posture is relaxed, almost contemplative. When he speaks, the others don't interrupt. He begins with a place, not a person. A stretch of desert not far from here, though not far is a flexible idea in a landscape like this. He describes a series of Loa Sahori, arranged in a way that doesn't quite feel natural. Travelers, he says, avoid that area at night, not because of bandits or terrain, but because of what has been seen there, or thought to be seen. The group listens, not with wide-eyed fear, but with a kind of quiet acceptance, as if stories like this are part of the landscape, as expected as the shifting winds. You lean in slightly, curiosity outweighing skepticism. The man continues, describing faint lights that appear between the rocks. Too steady to be fireflies, too distant to be campfires. Some say they move. Others insist they remain fixed, but seem to watch. You resist the urge to immediately categorize it as imagination. Out here, where the horizon stretches endlessly and the mind has room to wander, certainty feels less rigid. The story of wandering lights lingers at the edges of your thoughts, not quite fading, not quite demanding attention. It's the kind of thing that settles quietly, like sand in the folds of your clothing, always there, even when you forget it. Around you, the caravan begins to shift again, not toward rest this time, but toward movement. There's a subtle tightening in the air, a return of focus that feels different from earlier. The small flame is extinguished completely now, pressed gently into darkness until even its memory seems to disappear. No glow, no smoke, just night. You rise with the others, your body adjusting more quickly this time. The rhythm is becoming familiar. Pause, gather, move. The camels are coaxed upright again, their soft grumbles sounding less like complaint and more like routine. One of them lets out a particularly expressive groan, earning a quiet, knowing chuckle from a nearby trader. If camels had a union, you suspect they'd be filing daily grievances. The caravan forms its line once more, but there's a difference now. The spacing is tighter, the movements more deliberate. Conversations drop to near silence. Even without being told, you sense it. This stretch of the journey requires more attention. You fall into step, your senses sharpening almost instinctively. The ground beneath you feels slightly different, firmer in some places, uneven in others. Small stones crunch softly underfoot, breaking the earlier hush of sand. The sound carries more than you'd expect, echoing faintly in the open space. A mainstream historical fact slips into your awareness. Banditry was a persistent threat along many Silk Road routes, particularly in regions where political control was weak or terrain offered natural cover. Caravans often adjusted their behavior, traveling at night, tightening formation, reducing noise to minimize risk. You glance ahead, noticing how a few figures at the front seem more alert, their heads turning slightly as they scan the darkness. There's no visible danger, but that doesn't mean much out here. The absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, it's just absence. And in a desert this wide, that can be its own kind of uncertainty. The stars continue their silent watch above, unchanged, indifferent. You find yourself glancing upward briefly, as if checking that they're still there. They are. Reliable, at least in that sense. A soft signal passes through the group, a raised hand, a slight shift in pace. You don't fully understand it, but you follow anyway. The caravan adjusts direction just a fraction, angling toward what looks like a darker patch of Al-Ardi ahead. Could be nothing, or it could be everything. The wind picks up slightly, brushing against your face with a cooler edge. It carries no clear scent, but there's a faint dryness to it, like Al-Hawaru has been filtered through miles of empty space. You pull your cloak tighter, more out of habit than necessity. A quirky tidbit drifts into your thoughts. Some Silk Road caravans employed scouts who traveled ahead or along the flanks, watching for signs of danger, disturbed Al-Ardi, unusual tracks, or distant movement. You don't see any obvious scouts now, but that doesn't mean they aren't there. Not everything is meant to be seen. The line slows, then pauses. You stop, your breath settling into the quiet. No one speaks. Even the camels seem to sense the shift, their movements minimal, controlled. The silence here feels different from the earlier calm. It's not restful. It's attentive. A figure near the front crouches, examining something on the ground. You can't see it clearly from where you stand, but the posture suggests focus, not alarm. Still, the tension ripples back through the group, subtle but unmistakable. You wait. Time stretches slightly, the way it does when you're unsure what's coming next. Your mind offers unhelpful suggestions. Bandits, wild animals, perhaps even those mysterious lights from earlier deciding to make a surprise return appearance. You gently remind yourself that imagination tends to overachieve in situations like this. The figure stands, gestures briefly, and the caravan resumes movement. The tension doesn't vanish, but it eases just enough to let you breathe more normally again. You step forward, matching the pace, your senses still tuned to the environment. Every sound feels amplified. The soft thud of hooves, the faint creak of leather, the whisper of fabric against fabric. It's a quiet symphony of motion, each element playing its part. A low voice from somewhere behind you murmurs a brief comment, Something about tracks, perhaps. You don't catch the full meaning, but the tone suggests awareness rather than alarm. Whatever was seen, it's been noted, filed away, added to the collective understanding of the route. Historians still argue whether the threat of bandits was as constant as often portrayed, or if it has been exaggerated in later retellings to add drama to the narrative of Silk Road travel. Walking here, in this careful formation, you suspect the truth lies somewhere in between. Not every night is dangerous, but enough are to shape behavior. The terrain begins to shift again, rising slightly, offering a better vantage point. The caravan adjusts naturally, moving with the land rather than against it. You follow, your footing more confident now, your balance adapting to the terrain beneath you. A faint shape appears on the horizon, darker than the darkness around it. Could be a cluster of rocks, a low ridge, or something else entirely. The travelers ahead don't react strongly, but you notice how their posture remains attentive. Nothing is ignored. Everything is considered. You take a slow breath, the air cool and dry in your lungs. The earlier warmth of the tea has faded, replaced by a steady alertness. Not fear exactly, more like readiness. A brief moment of humor slips in when a camel behind you lets out a sudden, loud snort, startling itself as much as anyone else. The reaction is immediate, a few soft laughs, quickly subdued. Even here, even now, there's room for a small, shared moment of amusement. The desert doesn't forbid laughter. It just asks that you keep it appropriately quiet. You continue forward, the line stretching and compressing slightly as the terrain demands. The rhythm remains steady, though more deliberate than before. Every step feels considered, part of a larger pattern you're only beginning to understand. The sky above remains unchanged, a constant presence in a world of subtle shifts. You find comfort in that, even as everything else requires attention. And as the caravan moves through this more cautious stretch of the night, you begin to see another layer of the journey. Not just the trade, not just the stories, but the vigilance. The quiet, continuous awareness that keeps everyone moving safely through a landscape that offers no guarantees. There are no dramatic confrontations, no sudden clashes, just the steady, careful navigation of risk. And for now, that's enough. The road continues, watched but unchallenged. As you move forward together into the vast, listening dark, the cautious rhythm gradually loosens, almost imperceptibly, as the caravan leaves that tense stretch behind. No one announces it, but you feel it in your shoulders first. The way they drop just a fraction, the way your breathing settles into something less guarded. The earth beneath your feet smooths out again, and the line of travelers stretches a little wider, like a held breath finally released. Somewhere ahead, a voice begins speaking. Not urgently, not in warning, but with the easy cadence of someone filling space with memory. You don't catch the beginning, only the middle of a sentence describing a city so bright it almost sounds invented. You lean in, letting your steps match the pace of the speaker. He talks about a market where lanterns hang in rows so dense they mimic the stars, their light reflecting off polished metal and glass. He describes fabrics dyed in colors so deep they seem to hold shadows within them. Indigo, crimson, gold. You can almost see it, layered over the darkness around you like a second world. A mainstream historical fact drifts gently into place. Cities like Samarkand, Bokhara, and Kashgar were major hubs along the Silk Road, thriving on the exchange of goods, cultures, and ideas. These weren't just stops, they were destinations, alive with etijera and movement. The man gestures lightly as he speaks, his hands sketching shapes in the air. You notice how others nearby listen without interrupting, their attention quiet but engaged. This isn't just storytelling, it's remembering. He describes the sound of those markets, the overlapping voices, the calls of vendors, the clink of coins, the rustle of silk. Compared to the silence of the desert, it feels almost overwhelming. You imagine stepping into that noise after days of quiet, your senses struggling to keep up. It's like going from a whisper to a symphony without warning. A soft chuckle comes from someone behind you as the storyteller mentions a merchant who tried to sell the same kitha of fabric 3 times to the same buyer, each time with a different origin story. From the east, he said first. Then, from the west. Finally, from wherever you want it to be, the group responds with low laughter. There's your first gentle joke in this stretch, because some things apparently never change. Sales tactics have always been creative. You find yourself smiling slightly, the image vivid enough to feel real. A quirky tidbit slips into your thoughts. In some Silk Road cities, traders used scent as part of their sales approach, burning incense or perfumes near their stalls to attract customers. Imagine shopping while being gently ambushed by pleasant smells. Honestly, modern malls might want to take notes. The caravan continues forward, the darkness around you now filled not just with silence, but with these layered images of distant places. The desert becomes a canvas, and the stories paint over it. Markets, streets, buildings rising where moments ago there was only sand. Another voice joins in, adding to the picture. This one speaks of a city with high walls and narrow streets, where caravans enter through guarded gates and are directed to caravanserais, large inns designed specifically for travelers like this. You imagine wide courtyards, animals resting, traders unloading goods, the hawa'u filled with a mix of languages and smells. Historically, caravanserais were essential infrastructure along the Silk Road, spaced roughly a day's journey apart. They provided shelter, water, and a place to trade information as much as goods. But here, in the quiet of the night, they sound almost mythical. Places of rest that feel impossibly distant. Historians still argue whether these cities functioned more as cultural melting pots or as segmented communities where different groups remained largely separate. Listening to these overlapping stories, you suspect the truth was fluid, sometimes blending, sometimes holding apart, depending on the moment. The stars above remain constant, but now your attention drifts between them and the imagined glow of lanterns described by the travelers. Two kinds of light, one distant and ancient, the other human-made and fleeting. A man walking beside you nudges a small stone out of his path with his foot, then glances over as if to gauge your reaction to the stories. You nod slightly, not trusting yourself to speak without breaking the calm. He returns the nod, a quiet acknowledgement. The camel nearest you lets out a soft, almost conversational grunt, as if contributing its own opinion about bustling markets. You imagine it saying, "Too many people, not enough sand," which honestly feels like a fair review. A second ripple of humor passes through when someone mentions a city where the bread was so hard it could double as a defensive tool. Good for eating, better for throwing, they say, and a few quiet laughs follow. You make a mental note to be cautious around historical bread. The ground shifts slightly again, but not in a way that demands attention. Your steps have grown more confident, your body adapting to the subtle changes without conscious effort. It's a quiet transformation. You're still new here, but less out of place than before. The storyteller's voice softens as he describes leaving those cities behind each time. The contrast, he says, is always striking. From noise to silence, from color to monochrome, from crowded streets to endless horizon. And yet, both feel necessary. The city gives you energy. The desert gives you space. You consider that for a moment. In your own world, space often feels like something to fill, noise to add, distractions to layer on. Here, space is something you move through, something that shapes you in return. A third light moment slips in when someone quietly wonders aloud if the markets miss them when they leave, or if they simply reset, ready for the next wave of travelers. Probably relieved. Another voice replies, "Fewer people asking for discounts." The laughter is soft but genuine, blending easily into the rhythm of movement. The caravan continues, steady and unhurried, carrying not just goods, but these shared images of places far beyond the current stretch of land. You realize that even if you never see those cities yourself, you've already been there in a way. Through stories, through memory borrowed and briefly held. The desert around you remains unchanged, dark, vast, patient, but your perception of it has shifted. It's no longer just empty space. It's the distance between places, filled with the echoes of what lies at either end. And as the voices gradually quiet again, the images of lanterns and markets fading gently back into the night, you return to the present moment. The sound of footsteps, the cool air, the steady presence of those traveling beside you. The road stretches on, connecting not just locations, but experiences. And you walk it, carrying a little more of the world with each step. The echoes of lantern-lit markets fade slowly, like a dream you can almost hold on to if you don't move too quickly. But the caravan keeps moving, and with it, your thoughts shift back to the present. The steady rhythm of steps, the soft alélu breeze, the quiet companionship of those around you. After some time, minutes or perhaps longer, it's hard to tell. The caravan slows again. Not abruptly, just enough for you to notice the change. A few figures at the front angle toward a patch of al-ardu that looks slightly different. Less sand, more compact, with scattered stones that seem to hold the day's warmth just a little longer. It's enough. The group gathers once more, forming a loose circle. No fire is lit immediately this time. Instead, there's a pause, a shared stillness as everyone settles, as if the act of stopping itself needs a moment to arrive fully. Then, as if on cue, the tea vessel appears again. At this point, it almost feels like a recurring character in the journey. Reliable, understated, always present when needed. Water is poured, carefully measured. The leaves, somehow still in use, are added once more. You wonder how many times they can be brewed before they simply retire. Hopefully with a small ceremony and a well-earned rest. A mainstream historical fact settles gently into your awareness. As tea traveled westward along the Silk Road, it adapted to local cultures, resulting in a wide variety of preparation styles, from the salted butter tea of Tibet to spiced blends in Central Asia and beyond. What begins as a single plant becomes many different experiences. The water heats slowly, the vessel giving off that familiar, comforting hum. Around you, the travelers shift into more relaxed positions, some sitting, others crouching. The tension from earlier has eased, replaced by something quieter, more reflective. A man across from you reaches into his pack and produces a small bundle wrapped in cloth. He unwraps it carefully, revealing a mixture of dried herbs, thin stems, curled leaves, something that looks faintly floral. Without much discussion, he adds a pinch to the brewing tea. The scent changes almost immediately. It's subtle, but noticeable. A hint of something aromatic, slightly sweet, layered over the familiar earthiness. You lean in just a fraction, curious. This, you realize, is another variation, another adaptation. When the tea is poured and passed around, you accept your cup with a small nod, the motion now instinctive. You bring it closer, inhaling first. The aroma is gentler than before, less direct, more inviting. You take a sip. It's lighter. The bitterness has softened, replaced by a delicate complexity that lingers on your tongue. It doesn't demand attention the way the earlier brews did. Instead, it sits quietly, waiting to be noticed. You find yourself smiling slightly. If the first tea was a wake-up call and the second a survival tool, this one feels almost like a conversation. A quirky tidbit drifts into your thoughts. In some regions along the Silk Road, tea was blended with local herbs not just for flavor, but for perceived medicinal benefits. Everything from aiding digestion to warding off illness. You glance at your cup, wondering what this particular blend is meant to do. Hopefully something useful, or at least something that doesn't accidentally turn you into a historical anecdote. Nearby, a small group begins discussing routes again, but this time the tone is lighter, more speculative. They speak of different paths, some longer but safer, others shorter but riskier. One mentions a route that passes through a valley known for its unusual plants. Another counters with a path that avoids steep terrain but requires careful timing to reach water sources. It's like listening to a living map. Historians still argue whether the Silk Road should be understood as a single cohesive network or as a collection of constantly shifting routes shaped by environment and politics. Sitting here, listening to these conversations, the latter feels more accurate. The road isn't fixed. It evolves, adapting to the needs and knowledge of those who travel it. A soft breeze moves through the group, carrying the scent of the herbal tea with it. It mingles with the faint zapach of dust and fabric, creating a blend that feels uniquely tied to this moment. You take another sip, letting the warmth settle deeper this time. A man to your left chuckles quietly, holding up his cup as if inspecting it. He says something about how, If they keep adding ingredients, they'll eventually invent an entirely new drink. Next time we add bread, he jokes. Complete meal. A few soft laughs follow. There's your first gentle joke. Because honestly, at this point, it doesn't seem entirely impossible. Another voice joins in, suggesting that someone has probably already tried that. The idea of tea-soaked bread travels briefly through the group, met with a mix of amusement and mild skepticism. You make a mental note to avoid volunteering for that particular experiment. The camels, once again, have settled into their quiet routines. One of them shifts slightly, letting out a soft grunt that feels almost approving. Or maybe that's just your imagination assigning personalities again. Either way, it adds to the atmosphere. You glance around the circle, noticing how each person interacts with the tea slightly differently. Some sip slowly, savoring each mouthful. Others drink more practically, as if it's simply another part of the routine. There's no single correct way, just individual habits shaped by experience. A second ripple of humor moves through when someone recalls a trader who once tried to sell miracle tea that supposedly cured exhaustion instantly. It worked, the storyteller says. He drank it, and suddenly he wasn't tired, because he had to run away from everyone who wanted a refund. The laughter is soft but genuine, blending easily into the night. You take another sip, the flavor now fully familiar. It's no longer something you analyze. It just is. The conversation drifts again, this time toward weather. Subtle signs, patterns in the wind, the way the air feels before a change. It's practical knowledge, shared without urgency but with quiet importance. Out here, understanding the environment isn't optional. It's essential. The stars above remain steady, though you notice how a few have shifted slightly in position. Time is passing, even if it doesn't feel like it in the usual way. A third light moment arrives when a trader casually mentions that, after enough days on the road, even the camels start to look like they're judging your life choices. You glance at the nearest one, which happens to be staring directly in your direction. The timing is suspiciously perfect. You suppress a laugh, not wanting to encourage it. The tea vessel is set aside, its contents nearly gone. The leaves have given what they can, their flavors stretched across multiple brews, multiple moments. There's something quietly admirable about that. This idea of extracting every bit of usefulness before letting go. You set your empty cup down, feeling the lingering warmth in your hands. Around you, the caravan begins to shift again, preparing to move. The pause has done its work, resting bodies, steadying minds, reinforcing connections. And as you rise once more, stepping back into the rhythm of the journey, you carry with you the subtle variations of that tea. The way it changed, adapted, reflected the people and places it touched. The road ahead remains uncertain, but one thing is clear. Even something as simple as a cup of tea can hold an entire world within it. The last traces of that herbal warmth linger as you fall back into step, the caravan once again stretching into a quiet line beneath the vast sky. The rhythm returns easily now, almost too easily, as if your body has accepted this as its temporary normal. Step, breathe, listen. The desert offers no shortcuts, only patterns. For a while, there's only movement. The soft crunch of al-ardi, the steady sway of loaded packs, the occasional low murmur drifting between travelers. But then, gradually, something shifts, not in the landscape, but in the conversation. A voice rises ahead, calm and measured, carrying just enough to reach those nearby without disturbing the wider silence. It's not a story this time, not quite. More like an idea unfolding. You edge a little closer, curious. The speaker is older, his tone thoughtful, as if he's choosing each word carefully. He speaks of knowledge, not the kind written in books, though that has its place, but the kind carried by people. Shared, adapted, passed along like goods, but less tangible. A mainstream historical fact settles gently into your awareness. The Silk Road was not only a network for trade, but also a major conduit for the spread of ideas. Religions like Buddhism and Islam, technologies like papermaking, and scientific knowledge traveled alongside silk and spices. It wasn't just commerce. It was connection. The man gestures lightly as he walks, his hand moving in small arcs. as if tracing invisible paths in the air. He mentions monks who traveled these routes, carrying teachings across vast distances. Scholars who exchanged texts, debated philosophies, translated ideas from one language to another. You imagine them, figures not so different from the traders around you, but carrying scrolls instead of spices, questions instead of goods. A younger voice joins in, asking something you don't fully catch, but the response is clear enough. Knowledge, the older man says, doesn't belong to one place. It moves, it changes, it grows. You take that in, letting it settle. A quirky tidbit drifts into your thoughts. Paper, which originated in China, spread westward along the Silk Road, eventually reaching the Islamic world and then Europe. Before that, writing materials were far more limited: parchment, papyrus. Imagine trying to run a modern office without paper. Actually, don't. That sounds like a nightmare of memorization. The conversation deepens, though it remains quiet, almost meditative. Another traveler mentions astronomy, how observing the stars isn't just for navigation, but for understanding time, seasons, patterns. You glance upward again, the constellations now feeling slightly less distant, as if they're part of an ongoing discussion. Historians still argue whether the exchange of ideas along the Silk Road was primarily intentional, driven by scholars seeking knowledge, or incidental, a byproduct of trade and travel. Walking here, listening to these voices, it feels like a blend of both. Some came to learn, others simply shared what they knew along the way. The caravan continues, the earth beneath you steady, predictable. Your steps fall into alignment with those around you, your pace matching without conscious effort. It's a quiet synchronization, like a group moving to a rhythm no one explicitly hears. A man walking beside you adjusts a small bundle hanging from his belt. You notice it's not merchandise, but something else. Wrapped carefully, handled with a kind of respect. A book, perhaps, or a collection of notes. The idea that knowledge is being carried alongside goods becomes more tangible. The older speaker pauses, then adds something softer, almost reflective. He speaks of how ideas change as they travel. A story told in one place becomes something slightly different in another. A belief adapts to new surroundings, new contexts. You think back to the tea, the way it changed from simple leaves to salted, buttered, then herbal blends. The parallel feels clear. A brief moment of humor slips in when someone remarks that ideas, like tea, can become unrecognizable if you add too many ingredients. At some point, they say, "You're not sure what you started with." A few quiet laughs follow. There's your first light joke, because it's true in a way that feels both amusing and slightly concerning. Another voice counters gently, suggesting that change isn't necessarily loss. Sometimes it's growth. The conversation doesn't become a debate, just a quiet exchange of perspectives, each one offered and received without urgency. You listen, not trying to take sides, just absorbing. The wind moves softly around you, carrying fragments of these thoughts into the open space. It feels almost symbolic, though you resist the urge to overanalyze. Not everything needs to be turned into a metaphor. Sometimes wind is just wind. A second ripple of humor arrives when someone mentions a scholar who reportedly spent so long copying texts that he forgot where he originally got them from. He became his own source, the speaker says, and the group responds with soft amusement. Academic confusion, apparently, is not a modern invention. The stars above continue their slow drift, marking time in a way that feels both precise and immeasurable. You wonder how many ideas have traveled under this same sky, carried by people who never imagined the full impact of what they shared. The conversation shifts slightly, touching on language now, how words change, how meanings shift. A single term in one place might carry a completely different nuance in another. Translation, you realize, isn't just about words. It's about context, culture, interpretation. A third light moment slips in when someone jokingly suggests that, after enough translations, a simple message like, "Bring tea," could turn into "Summon the sacred leaves of destiny." The laughter is quiet but genuine, the image vivid enough to linger. You smile faintly, the idea amusing and oddly fitting. The caravan moves on, the discussion gradually softening into smaller, more scattered exchanges. But the theme remains, hovering in the background. Movement, change, connection. You take a slow breath, the cool air filling your lungs, and realize that this journey isn't just about crossing distance. It's about being part of a flow of goods, of stories, of ideas that stretch far beyond any single moment. And as you walk beneath the stars, surrounded by voices that carry fragments of knowledge from across the world, you begin to understand something subtle but profound. The Silk Road doesn't just connect places, it connects minds. The conversation about knowledge fades into a softer hum, like embers settling after a brief flare. You keep walking, your steps steady, but something has shifted inward. The ideas linger, stretching quietly across your thoughts, until the silence between voices begins to feel larger. Not empty, just expansive. The caravan continues through a stretch of land that feels particularly open, even by desert standards. The horizon doesn't just sit ahead of you. It wraps around, unbroken, offering no landmarks, no interruptions, just space. And in that space, you start to notice something else. Loneliness. Not the sharp kind, not the kind that demands attention. This is quieter. A slow, creeping awareness that, despite being surrounded by others, each person here carries their own separate world, their own memories, their own muqsidin, their own reasons for walking this path. You glance at the figures ahead of you, their silhouettes moving in rhythm, and realize how little you truly know about them. Names, origins, destinations, these details exist, but they're not spoken often. Out here, identity feels less fixed, more fluid. A mainstream historical fact settles gently into your awareness. Many Silk Road journeys took months, even years, and travelers often spent long stretches away from home, separated from familiar faces and routines. The psychological toll of such distance was real, even if rarely documented in detail. You imagine it, days blending into weeks, weeks into months, the road becoming both companion and barrier. The initial sense of adventure giving way to something quieter, more introspective. The wind moves softly around you, carrying no particular scent, just the faint neutrality of open space. You inhale, and for a moment it feels like breathing in distance itself. A trader walking a few paces ahead adjusts his pace slightly, creating a small gap between himself and the person in front. Not enough to break the line, just enough to carve out a pocket of solitude. You notice others doing the same, subtle shifts that allow for brief moments of being alone, even within the group. There's a delicate balance, together but separate. A quirky tidbit drifts into your thoughts. Some long-distance traders along the Silk Road reportedly developed personal rituals to cope with the monotony and isolation of travel. Counting steps, reciting poems, even creating small games to pass the time. You wonder what your ritual would be. Probably something involving overthinking and occasionally tripping over nothing. You take a careful step just in case. The silence stretches further now, the earlier conversations replaced by the steady rhythm of movement. Without voices to anchor you, your thoughts begin to wander more freely. You think about where you started, though that feels increasingly distant, and where you're going, which remains unclear. The journey itself has become the focus, the in-between space where everything happens and nothing is quite defined. Historians still argue whether the emotional experiences of Silk Road travelers can be meaningfully reconstructed from the limited sources available. Personal feelings rarely made it into official records, leaving much to interpretation. Walking here, you realize how much of this journey exists beyond documentation. It's felt, not written. A soft sound breaks the quiet, a low hum, almost musical. You turn slightly, trying to locate its source. It's faint, but steady. After a moment, you spot it. A traveler a short distance behind you, humming to himself. The melody is simple, repetitive, but comforting. It doesn't demand attention, doesn't try to impress. It just exists. You listen for a while, letting the sound weave gently into the rhythm of your steps. It fills the space without overwhelming it, offering a subtle counterpoint to the silence. A second figure picks up the tune, not quite in sync, but close enough to create a soft harmony. It's unplanned, unspoken, just a shared moment emerging naturally. You feel something ease inside you. A brief moment of humor slips in when the first singer pauses, clears his throat, and resumes with slightly more enthusiasm. Perhaps too much enthusiasm. The second singer falters for a beat, then adjusts, and you catch a faint chuckle from someone nearby. There's your first light joke of this stretch, woven gently into the moment. Even in loneliness, there's room for small, shared amusement. The melody continues for a while, then fades, leaving the silence slightly less heavy than before. It's as if the song has marked the space, made it more navigable. You glance upward again, the stars unchanged, steady in their quiet patterns. They don't feel lonely, or perhaps they do in a way you can't quite understand. The caravan moves on, each person maintaining their place, their pace. The gaps between individuals expand and contract subtly, like breathing. A second ripple of humor arrives when someone mutters something about the song getting stuck in their head for the next 3 days. Another voice responds, "At least it's better than counting camels," and a few soft laughs follow. You glance at the nearest camel, which appears blissfully unaware of its role in this hypothetical counting exercise. You consider trying it anyway. 1 camel, 2 camels, no, that's dangerously close to falling asleep while walking. Probably not the best strategy. The ground beneath you remains steady, but your awareness of it sharpens. Each step becomes more deliberate, more present. It's as if the quiet has tuned your senses, making small details more noticeable. A third light moment slips in when a traveler ahead stumbles slightly, catches himself, and then glances around as if hoping no one noticed. Unfortunately for him, someone did. A soft voice calls out, "The desert claims another victim," and the group responds with gentle laughter. The traveler raises a hand in mock acknowledgement, and the moment passes. The small, but it matters. The loneliness doesn't disappear, but it changes. It becomes less isolating, more shared. A common thread running through everyone here, acknowledged without needing to be spoken aloud. You realize that this is part of the journey, too. Not just the movement across land, but the movement within. The quiet spaces where thoughts settle, where emotions surface and then drift away again. And as you continue walking, surrounded by others who are both close and distant at the same time, you begin to understand that loneliness here isn't something to be avoided. It's something to move through, like the desert itself. The quiet stretch lingers just long enough to feel familiar, and then, almost without ceremony, it begins to soften. Not vanish, just shift. The spaces between travelers narrow slightly again, the subtle distance giving way to a quiet pullback toward one another. It's not forced. It feels natural, like the caravan itself prefers connection after too much silence. You notice it first in the way 2 figures ahead fall into step side by side, their earlier gap closing without a word. One gestures lightly as he speaks, the other nodding in slow rhythm. The conversation is too soft to catch, but the tone carries, easy, unguarded. You find yourself drifting a little closer to the group as well, not out of necessity, but because it feels right. The wind has calmed, or perhaps you've simply grown used to it. Either way, the air feels less intrusive now, more like a quiet companion than an ever-present force. You pull your cloak slightly tighter, more out of habit than need. A man walking near you glances over, his expression neutral but not distant. There's a brief moment of eye contact, not awkward, not intense, just recognition. You nod and he returns it, a small exchange that somehow feels meaningful. A mainstream historical fact settles gently into your awareness. Silk Road caravans often brought together people from vastly different backgrounds, many of whom had never met before the journey. Yet, through shared hardship and reliance, temporary but strong bonds frequently formed among travelers. You can see how that happens. A voice nearby begins recounting a small, personal story. Not a grand tale, just a moment. Something about losing a sandal in a river crossing and having to finish the journey with mismatched footwear. The details are simple, but the way it's told draws a few quiet laughs. There's your first light joke in this stretch, soft and easy. Another traveler adds a similar story, this one involving a misplaced bundle that turned up days later in someone else's pack. "At least it wasn't food," he says, and a few more chuckles follow. You get the sense that these small inconveniences become shared memories, woven into the fabric of the journey. You listen not just to the words, but to the way they're received. There's no judgment, no competition, just a gentle exchange of experiences, each one adding to a growing sense of familiarity. A quirky tidbit drifts into your thoughts. In some caravan traditions, travelers would adopt temporary nicknames based on events during the journey. Small mishaps, habits, or quirks becoming lighthearted identifiers. You glance around, wondering what yours would be. Hopefully something dignified. Realistically, probably not. Careful step, someone might suggest. Or T-face, based on your earlier reactions. You decide not to ask. The group continues moving, but the rhythm feels different now, less solitary, more collective. Conversations overlap slightly, forming a soft background hum that replaces the earlier silence. It's not loud, just present. You find yourself walking alongside the same man who nodded to you earlier. After a moment, he speaks, not loudly, just enough for you to hear. He asks a simple question, where you've traveled from. You hesitate for a fraction of a second, not because you don't have an answer, but because the question feels larger than expected. In this place, where isn't just a location, it's a story. You offer something simple in return, not overly detailed, just enough to engage. He listens, nods, then shares his own. A place to the east, known for its cold winters and wide rivers. His tone is calm, almost reflective. The exchange is brief, but it lingers. Historians still argue whether these kinds of interpersonal connections significantly influence trade outcomes along the Silk Road or if they remain secondary to economic concerns. Walking here, it feels difficult to separate the two. Trust, after all, often begins with something as simple as a conversation. Another traveler joins in, adding a comment about a region known for its particularly stubborn horses. They refuse to go where you want, he says, but always go somewhere. The group responds with soft laughter. There's your second gentle joke, because the logic, while flawed, feels oddly accurate. You notice how easily these small interactions build on one another, creating a sense of continuity. A moment of silence gives way to a story, which leads to a question, which becomes a shared memory. The camel nearest you lets out a low, contented sound, as if approving of the improved social atmosphere. Or perhaps it's just adjusting its posture. You've learned not to overinterpret camel behavior. It's a complex emotional landscape. The ground beneath you remains steady, the terrain no longer demanding your full attention. This allows your focus to shift more toward the people around you, their movements, their voices, the subtle ways they interact. A third light moment slips in when someone jokingly suggests that, by the end of the journey, they'll all know each other's stories better than their own. Another voice responds, only the interesting parts, and a few quiet laughs follow. It's a gentle acknowledgement of how selective memory can be. You find yourself smiling again, the expression coming more easily now. The stars above continue their slow drift, unchanged yet somehow more familiar. You've looked at them so often now that they feel less like distant objects and more like quiet companions, marking time without urgency. The caravan moves forward, but the sense of isolation has softened. In its place is something lighter, not quite belonging, not quite friendship, but a step in that direction. You realize that these connections, however temporary, carry their own kind of weight. They don't need to last beyond the journey to matter. In fact, their fleeting nature might be part of what makes them meaningful. A shared cup of tea, a quiet story, a simple question asked under the stars. These are the threads that bind the caravan together, even as each person continues toward their own destination. And as you walk alongside them, no longer just observing but participating, you begin to feel that subtle shift within yourself. You're not just traveling through this world anymore. You're part of it. The quiet ease of shared steps lingers, almost gentle enough to make you forget how quickly the desert can change its mind. Conversations taper into softer threads again, not from discomfort this time, but from a kind of natural settling. The caravan moves forward, steady and unhurried, carrying its small, growing sense of connection beneath the wide sky. and then, without warning, the wind shifts. At first, it's subtle, a faint change in direction, a slightly sharper edge against your cheek. You might have ignored it entirely if not for the way a few of the more experienced travelers react. A glance upward, a tightening of cloaks, a brief exchange of looks that doesn't need words. You feel it next in the air itself. Something is coming. A mainstream historical fact settles into your awareness. Sudden sandstorms were a constant hazard along many Silk Road routes, capable of disorienting caravans, burying tracks, and forcing travelers to halt or change direction entirely. They didn't always arrive with dramatic warning. Sometimes they simply began. The wind strengthens, no longer brushing but pushing, carrying with it the first faint grains of sand. They tap lightly against your clothing, your face, like tiny, persistent reminders that the environment here is never truly still. The caravan slows, not abruptly, but with purpose. The line tightens again, closer than before. Voices rise slightly, not in panic, but in coordination. Instructions are passed quickly, efficiently. You don't catch every word, but the intent is clear. Prepare. A trader ahead begins securing his bundles more tightly, pulling ropes with practiced speed. Another adjusts the covering over a load, ensuring nothing loose can be carried away. The camels shift uneasily, sensing the change before it fully arrives. One lets out a low, uneasy groan, its earlier calm replaced by something closer to concern. You pull your cloak up higher, instinctively shielding your face as the wind grows stronger. The air feels thicker now, heavier with fine sand that moves in restless currents. A quirky tidbit drifts into your thoughts, oddly timed but somehow fitting. Experienced desert travelers often carried cloth specifically to cover their mouths and noses during sandstorms, filtering out the worst of the dust. You quickly follow suit, adjusting your cloak to serve the same purpose. Improvisation counts. The sky above begins to blur. Not completely, but enough that the stars lose some of their sharpness. The horizon, once clear, softens into a shifting haze. The caravan stops. This time, the halt is decisive. You feel the shift in energy immediately. The earlier rhythm of movement gives way to a different kind of focus, one rooted in stillness, in endurance rather than progress. Figures move quickly now, securing animals, reinforcing loads, checking positions. There's no chaos, just urgency. Everyone knows what to do, and they do it. Historians still argue whether caravans typically attempted to push through sandstorms or if they more often chose to wait them out. Watching this unfold, the answer seems clear. Sometimes the best way forward is to stop. The wind rises further, carrying more sand with it. It stings now when it hits exposed skin, a sharp, persistent sensation that demands attention. You turn slightly, angling your body to reduce the impact, copying the posture of those around you. The camels are guided to kneel, their long legs folding beneath them as they settle into the ground. Their bodies form low, stable shapes, less vulnerable to the force of the wind. You move closer to one instinctively, using its bulk as a partial shield. It doesn't seem to mind, or perhaps it simply has more important concerns. Visibility drops, not to zero, but enough that the world feels smaller, more enclosed. The vast openness of the desert contracts into a shifting, swirling space defined by wind and sand. A voice calls out something you can't quite hear, carried away almost immediately. Another responds, louder, repeating the instruction. Communication becomes more deliberate, more direct. You crouch slightly, lowering your center of gravity, your cloak pulled tight around your face. The sand moves around you in constant motion, a restless sea of tiny particles. A brief, almost absurd thought crosses your mind. This is probably not the moment to complain about the weather. You suppress a small, internal laugh. There's your first light joke, because if you did complain, the desert would likely respond with, "This isn't even my final form." The wind howls now, a low, continuous sound that fills the space, making everything else feel distant. It's not deafening, but it's persistent, a reminder that you're in the middle of something far larger than yourself. You glance around, catching glimpses of others through the shifting arimelu. Their forms are partially obscured, but their presence is steady. No one runs. No one panics. They endure. A second moment of humor slips in when a camel beside you lets out a disgruntled noise that somehow manages to sound like a complaint about the entire situation. You can't help but think, yes, same. Even in a sandstorm, the camels maintain their commitment to mild dissatisfaction. The ground beneath you feels different now, the surface shifting as sand moves across it. You adjust your footing carefully, keeping your balance as best you can. Time becomes difficult to measure. Minutes stretch or compress, you're not sure which. The storm doesn't announce how long it plans to stay, but gradually, almost imperceptibly, something begins to change. The wind eases, not all at once, but in small increments. The force lessens, the remelu hitting your cloak with less shiddet. The air begins to clear, the haze thinning just enough to reveal faint outlines again. The caravan remains still, waiting. Experience has taught them not to move too soon. A third light moment arrives quietly when someone, barely audible over the fading wind, mutters something about needing to shake out half the desert from their clothes later. A few soft, tired laughs follow, relief more than humor, but humor nonetheless. The storm continues to weaken, the world slowly reassembling itself around you. Shapes become clearer, distances more defined. The stars begin to reappear, faint at first, then stronger. You lower your cloak slightly, taking a cautious breath. The air is still dusty, but breathable. Around you, the caravan begins to stir again. Not moving forward yet, just adjusting, checking, reorienting. The desert, it seems, has made its point, and you, along with everyone else, have listened. The storm's ostatke drift away like a fading memory, leaving the air thinner, quieter, almost fragile. For a while, no one moves. It's not hesitation, it's patience. The kind that comes from knowing the desert rarely finishes speaking in a single sentence. You remain crouched a moment longer, brushing a thin layer of sand from your cloak. It falls away easily, slipping back into the vastness it came from. Around you, others do the same, small, practical gestures that mark the return to motion without rushing it. The stars reassert themselves overhead, sharper now, as if the storm has polished the sky. You take a slow breath, the air still carrying a faint dryness, but no longer pressing against you. The silence that follows feels different from before, earned, perhaps. A mainstream historical fact settles quietly into your awareness. After disruptions like sandstorms, caravans often needed time to reorient themselves, confirming direction and ensuring no one or nothing had been lost. Navigation wasn't just about moving forward, it was about knowing exactly where you were again. A few of the more experienced travelers step slightly apart, glancing upward, then toward the horizon. Their movements are calm, deliberate. You watch as one traces a small arc in the air with his hand, aligning something unseen with the stars above. There's no map in front of him, no instrument, just memory, practice, and the quiet confidence of repetition. The caravan begins to rise again, slowly this time. Camels unfold themselves with familiar, slightly dramatic motions, their tawilu legs stretching back into place. One shakes its head, sending a small cloud of sand outward, as if protesting the entire experience. You can't blame it. You stand, feeling the subtle weight of sand still clinging to your clothes, your boots, even your hair. It's a reminder that the storm doesn't fully leave. It lingers, carried forward in small ways. A quirky tidbit drifts into your thoughts. Some caravans developed specific post-storm routines, including checking for buried tracks or using landmarks that remained visible even after shifting a remelu. You glance at the ground, noticing how much it has changed. Any clear path that existed before is gone now, erased and rewritten. Historians still argue whether such environmental challenges significantly altered major Silk Road routes over time, or if experienced traders managed to maintain consistent paths despite them. Standing here, it feels like both could be true. The land changes, but so do the people who move through it. A voice calls out softly, and the group responds with quiet acknowledgement. There's a brief exchange, directions, perhaps, or confirmation of alignment. Then, without ceremony, the caravan begins to move again. The first steps feel slightly uncertain, not from fear, but from recalibration. The ground is different now, the surface subtly reshaped. You adjust your footing, finding balance again. As you walk, you notice how the spacing between travelers has shifted. The storm has drawn everyone closer, and that closeness lingers. The line is tighter, more cohesive, as if the shared experience has subtly reinforced the bonds between you all. A man beside you glances over, offering a brief, knowing smile. No words are needed. The moment says enough, we made it through. You return the expression, feeling a quiet sense of connection. A second figure ahead begins to speak, his voice low but clear. He doesn't tell a story this time. Instead, he reflects on the journey so far, on the tariqa still ahead. His words are simple, but they carry weight. He speaks of distance, not just the physical kind, but the distance between moments. How each stretch of the journey feels separate, yet connected. How you leave parts of yourself behind without realizing it. You listen, the idea settling into your thoughts. A second ripple of humor slips in when someone quietly remarks that they've probably left enough sand behind to build a small hill. Another voice responds, "Then we'll find it again tomorrow," and a few soft laughs follow. The desert, it seems, has a sense of recycling. The caravan continues, the rhythm returning, though slightly altered. There's a steadiness now that wasn't quite there before. A quiet confidence shaped by having faced something unpredictable and come through it together. You glance back briefly, though there's little to see. The storm has erased its own tracks, leaving no clear sign of where it passed. It's as if it never happened, except for the sand still clinging to everything. The stars guide you forward once more, their patterns unchanged, reliable. You find comfort in that consistency, even as everything else shifts. A third light moment arrives when a camel near the front lets out an especially dramatic sigh, as if concluding a long and difficult day. Someone murmurs, "Same," and the word travels lightly through the group, met with quiet amusement. You smile again, the expression coming easily now. The land ahead begins to change subtly. The horizon, once flat and uninterrupted, now hints at variation. Faint shapes, slight rises, the suggestion of something more defined. It's not dramatic, but it's noticeable. Dawn is approaching. You don't see the sun yet, but you feel its promise in the vozduch. A slight shift in temperature, a softening of the darkness. The sky at the far edge begins to lighten, just enough to suggest what's coming. The caravan senses it too. The pace adjusts slightly, not faster, but more purposeful. There's an unspoken understanding that this stretch of the journey is nearing a pause. You walk on, your steps steady, your awareness tuned to the subtle changes around you. The night has carried you far, through stories, silence, wind, and sand. And now, as the first hint of dawn touches the horizon, you feel something else settling in. Reflection. Not heavy, not overwhelming. Just a quiet recognition of what has passed and what remains. The road continues as it always does. But for now, you walk toward the light. The horizon softens from black to a deep, uncertain blue, and the stars begin their quiet retreat. Not vanishing all at once, but fading, one by one, like lanterns being gently dimmed. You keep walking, though the rhythm has changed again. There's a subtle lift in the caravan now, a sense of nearing something, not an ending exactly, but a pause shaped like one. The earth ahead reveals more of itself with each step. What was once suggestion becomes form. Low ridges, scattered stones, a faint path that might have been invisible in the night but now seems almost welcoming. The desert, in daylight's approach, feels less mysterious, though no less vast. A mainstream historical fact settles into your awareness. Silk Road journeys rarely had clear beginnings or endings in the modern sense. Caravans moved between hubs, stopping at caravanserais, markets, or seasonal nakarthan, often dissolving and reforming with different members along the way. The road was continuous even if the travelers were not. You notice it now, the way some individuals begin to shift their attention forward, while others glance sideways, as if measuring distance not just in land, but in companionship. The shared journey, however meaningful, is beginning to thin at the edges. The caravan slows as the light strengthens. The sky turns a pale wash of color, and the first true hint of sun touches the horizon. It's gentle, not dramatic, a gradual unveiling. The group begins to gather again, though this time the circle feels different. Less about preparation, more about acknowledgement. There is no fire. Instead, a small, portable kettle is brought forward, its surface still carrying traces of soot from earlier flames. Water is poured with the same care as before, though now the light reveals every motion clearly. The tea leaves, those same resilient leaves, are added once more. You watch them sink, unfold, release what remains. A quirky tidbit drifts into your thoughts. In some traditions, the final brew of tea, made from leaves used many times, was considered the most subtle, valued not for strength, but for its delicacy. You find that idea fitting. The cups are passed again, slower this time. When one reaches you, you hold it for a moment before drinking, noticing how the warmth feels different in the cool edge of dawn. You take a sip. It's light, almost faint, but still present. Around you, voices begin to rise, not loudly, but with a different tone than before. Conversations of departure, of next steps. Routes diverge here, it seems. Some will continue west, others north, a few perhaps turning back east. Historians still argue whether these moments of separation were formalized with rituals or simply occurred as practical decisions. Watching now, it feels like a blend. There's no ceremony, but there is intention. A man you spoke with earlier, the one from the eastern rivers, steps closer, offering a brief nod. "Different road," he says simply. You return the gesture, understanding without needing more. Another traveler adjusts his pack, exchanging a few final words with a companion before stepping into a different direction. There's no lingering farewell, no drawn-out goodbye. Just movement. A first light joke slips in when someone remarks that at least the camels won't have to argue about direction anymore. A nearby voice responds, "They'll find something else," and a few soft laughs follow. Even at the edge of parting, humor remains. The camels, for their part, seem unfazed. One stretches its neck, blinking slowly at the growing light, as if considering the day ahead with mild skepticism. You suspect its opinion of the entire journey remains unchanged. You take another sip of tea, the flavor barely there now, but somehow more meaningful for it. A second ripple of humor comes when a trader pats his pack and says, "If I've lost anything, I'm blaming the storm." Someone replies, "If you've gained anything, it's mine." And the group shares a quiet chuckle. Ownership, it seems, is flexible at dawn. The light grows stronger, revealing faces more clearly than at any point before. You see lines of fatigue, yes, but also something steadier, experience perhaps. Or simply the quiet satisfaction of having continued. A third light moment arrives when someone glances at the sky and says, "Too bright," as if the sun itself is being unnecessarily enthusiastic. The comment earns a few tired smiles. You finish your tea, setting the empty cup down with a sense of quiet finality. Around you, the caravan begins to dissolve, not abruptly, but in a series of small, individual decisions. One by one, travelers step away, aligning themselves with new directions, new paths. You remain still for a moment, watching. There's no grand conclusion, no final statement, just the understanding that this part of the journey has reached its natural pause. The road, however, continues, and as the last few figures begin to move away, their shapes growing smaller against the brightening landscape, you feel something settle within you. Not loss, not quite. More like completion. You turn slightly, looking out across the open land, the path ahead undefined but present. The tea, the stories, the silence, the storm. All of it lingers, not as separate memories, but as part of a single, continuous experience. You take a slow breath, the morning air cool and clear, and then, quietly, you step forward. The light softens as your pace eases, and the world around you seems to exhale. The urgency of movement fades, replaced by a gentle stillness that wraps itself around your thoughts like a familiar cloak. The desert, once vast and uncertain, now feels calmer, its edges less sharp, its silence more welcoming. You walk a little further, then pause, letting the moment stretch without needing to fill it. The sky above is pale now, the stars fully gone, but their presence lingers in memory, like distant echoes. The road ahead doesn't demand anything from you, simply exists open and patient. You think back to the night, the firelight flickering against quiet faces, the first sharp sip of tea, the low hum of voices sharing stories under the endless sky. You remember the wind rising, the aramelu shifting, the way the caravan held together without needing to speak it aloud. Each moment feels softer now, as if time has smoothed their edges. Your breath slows, the air is still, and in that stillness, you realize something gentle. Not every journey needs a clear destination. Some are meant to be experienced, step by step, without urgency, without expectation. You adjust your cloak, feeling its weight settle comfortably around you. The desert no longer feels like something to cross. It feels like something to rest within. Your steps grow quieter, slower, until even they seem to fade into the background. The world narrows, not in a limiting way, but in a calming one. Just you, the earth beneath your feet, and the soft light of a new day. No rush, no noise, just a quiet continuation. And as you stand there, letting the calm settle fully, the last traces of the journey drift gently into stillness.